Welcome to the show, Julia Boorstin.
Thank you so much for having me, Jayson.
Yeah, great to meet you and get a little time with you. Okay, lots of questions, man. Your book is, I got your book here, Women Who Lead, so we're going to get into that. It's been very inspiring. My wife first found you and turned me on to you, and I'm like, wow, okay. Psyched to have the conversation. So, but I want to start with, sometimes as a way to get to know you for our listeners, it's because it's a relationship podcast. We always ask people, are you married? Do you have kids? Give us a little bit of the demographic bio here.
I'm married. I recently had my 15-year anniversary with my husband. We have 2 boys. Our younger one just turned 9 and our older one is 11. And my book wouldn't be possible without my husband. I feel like he is an essential partner, both as a sounding board, but also just as a parenting partner. I mean, I wrote my book primarily on nights and weekends, and I needed him to feel as invested in it as I was. So on Saturdays when I needed to spend hours writing, he would take the kids to do activities or take them to soccer practice or whatever it was. So I really feel like this book would not have happened without him. That's why I dedicated it to him.
Oh, that's cool. That's sweet. 15 years. Yeah, my wife and I just did 15 years also. So congrats.
Congratulations.
How do you two navigate conflict when you guys get into stuff together? Do you have any go-to?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how other couples navigate conflict. I express all my feelings. My husband has accused me of not having an editor of my emotions. So you see what you see is what you get. The good news is you always know where you stand with me. The bad news is that you always know where you stand with me. Right. So he's much more he internalizes things more. So I think it's sort of taken us a while to figure out our ability to communicate without things getting too heated. And I was just joking with you before the camera started rolling about how once we were in an argument and he said, well, maybe men are just from Mars and women are, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. He's going down that route. And I said, no, I think men are from Mars and women are from Earth. But I think we have sort of this underlying commitment and understanding that we're both coming from a place of love, even if we have different perspectives. But I think one thing that's been so interesting about this book is that I realize we do have such really different perspectives on things. Yeah. And I think it's been really helpful for him to see how different it is for me to walk through the world as a woman, and for me to be able to express my frustrations, and for him to be able to be empathetic to me. And I think actually having him be an editor on my book, someone who I could bounce things off of, has helped him in his job. He, works with a lot of women, and I think it's helped him be empathetic to the experiences of others.
Yeah, cool. I'm curious, I wasn't going to ask you this, but it just popped up. Because we're kind of talking about gender differences in a way right now, and we're going to get into some of the stats from your book that are mind-blowing. But did you get any flack for being so gendered in a way about this book? I mean, there's some very gendered, like, hey, men are this way and men make this and women make this. And
I really struggled with that. And it was a conversation I had with my friends, my peers, and a lot of women in the book, of not wanting to sort of other women and treat them as if they were this other thing. And that was a reason I didn't want to write this book for many years, right? This is something that I only came to 20 years into my career as a business journalist. But the reason why I felt like it was necessary to talk about the differences between men and women is because women have such little representation in business. Mm-hmm. If women were anywhere near 50%, I don't think it would be necessary or frankly even relevant to talk about the differences. Yeah. But the fact that women are 10% of the CEOs of the Fortune 500, and in the world which I am reporting on, which is the tech world, women now draw 2% of all venture capital dollars, down from an average of 3% over the prior decade. Yeah. Because those percentage differences are so vast, and because the power dynamics are so persistent, and men control the vast majority, not only of all leadership positions, but also of all money in that is being invested, whether in VCs or in mutual funds, you name it. That is why I thought it was necessary to talk about the differences, and frankly, to talk about the differences in a positive way. For many years, the idea of a CEO, female CEO, that was a negative thing. That was like a bad word. And the prime example of female tech CEO was Elizabeth Holmes. And so for me, it was so important to change the conversation and make it not about, oh, there are very few female CEOs. Let's just focus on the rare failures, because that's sort of the instinct to focus on the train wreck. But to just shift the conversation to hear positive examples of ways in which women lead that not only women should be celebrating, but also men can be learning from. I mean, the other thing that I don't think is a secret is that it's been 5 years since the Me Too and Time's Up movement. And that movement was focusing on what men did wrong. And I used to interview a lot of the guys who got fired, whether it was Les Moonves or Travis Kalanick. I interviewed them frequently. And I think that movement, though necessary, was really about failures, right? The failure of men in positions of power. What I wanted to do, and I'm clearly a very positive, optimistic person, and when women lead, I wanted to focus not on what some people were doing wrong, but what women were doing right.
Yeah.
And I do think, yes, the book is gendered, but I felt like it was necessary to talk about the positive attributes that women bring to the table, because they have so little access to capital and they have held so few positions of power, and they currently hold so few positions of power.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask you, because you say in the book, you didn't want to write the book about inequitable systems and just focus on that. You wanted to focus on this positive, like, look at how many women are succeeding right now. So it's awesome. If we can back up one step, how do you describe yourself right now, 2023, in terms of like what you do? How do you describe that to people?
I'm a journalist. My day job, I mean, I would say I'm a mom, I'm a wife, a mom of 2 little boys and a wife. And I would say a partner. I kind of feel like the word wife seems so old-fashioned. Partner to my amazing husband. And I'm a journalist. My day job is I'm CNBC's senior media and tech reporter. I've been at CNBC for over 16 years. I'm also an author with this book, my first book. And I feel very grateful to get to interview amazing people, tell stories that I hope people haven't heard before. And also, I love covering innovation and technology. It makes me so excited to get to report on people who are approaching problems differently, creating new solutions. And I love covering technology and innovators, because I think that's really a way to get a window into the future.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, you're doing so many things. And you started your career very young, doing this in primarily male-dominated spaces, right?
Yeah. I've only had 2 real jobs. I started straight out of college as a reporter at Fortune magazine. I was there for 6 years. And in that time, I started appearing as a contributor on CNN headline news. And from there, I was offered a job at CNBC. And when I was at Fortune, I loved the magazine industry. I thought I would sort of do both, do TV and magazines my whole life. But when I got this full-time job offer from CNBC, I figured, I should try this out. Maybe I'll last a year and see how it goes. Here I am over 16 years later. And I really loved the ability to do storytelling in the TV medium. I started out as a general assignment reporter, quickly became a media reporter. From there, started covering social media, and then added technology. And now covering media and technology, these fields are so interconnected. Yeah. It seems like you can't talk about media without talking about technology. And one of my favorite projects at CNBC is I created this thing called the Disruptor 50 list, which looks at the 50 fastest growing tech startups. So that has really enabled me to do that sort of focus on innovation and entrepreneurs, which ultimately led me to this idea of where the greatest discrepancy is in terms of gender gaps is really in the tech world. And I figured if I could find the women who had defied the craziest odds, women in tech face more odds against them than in any other industry. If I could find the women who had defied those odds, then I would be able to tell stories that would be really inspiring, but also would have valuable key takeaways of skills and strategies that everyone would benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, y'all. I hope you have ordered my new book by now, Getting to Zero, How to Work Through Conflict in Your High-Stakes Relationships. It's already getting dozens of 5-star reviews on Amazon. I've heard from a lot of you. Thank you for buying the book, buying it on Audible, buying it on Kindle. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the support. I think this book is going to help a lot of people. It's all about how do we get back to a good place after some kind of disconnection or rupture or conflict. That's what the entire book is about. And if you want a roadmap on how to get back to a good place, what I call zero, please order my book. GettingToZeroBook.com. Get you some extra goodies, a conflict quiz, some additional PDFs, etc. And you can order it in all the places and support your local bookstores. Cool. Thanks. Back to the show. I want to read some of the stats from your book here. I've just got some notes here. And you can add on, and then I kind of want to unpack some of the inequity here. So women earn 82 cents of every dollar men earn. Black women earn 63 for every dollar white men earn. Women are only secured 3% of all venture capital funding globally, and now you said it's down to 2%? Mm-hmm. The check size for funding is half that that men get for women. The check, startups run by men brought home 82% of all capital. Male VCs are half as likely as female VCs to invest in female-funded companies. 87% of VCs with investment power are men, and 70% are white. Male investors are more likely to invest in male CEOs, and on and on and on. So, just this is a short list, and there you cover even more stats here in your book. And I just, when I
by the way,
this,
that list is why I decided to take a gendered approach. Right? Exactly. Yeah. Like I felt like if women had anywhere near equity, I wouldn't want to talk about differences between men and women, but they are nowhere close. So with those crazy stats, that's why I felt like I had to really talk about differences in gendered approaches. But I would point out that I'm not a biologist. I'm a storyteller. I'm a journalist. And part of being a journalist is telling stories, but also finding research. But my stuff is not about biological differences, right? I'm talking about things that are socialized. And because these things are socialized, it means anyone can learn them if their advantages and the bad parts, you can unlearn them as well.
Yeah. So I was on a call today with some students here at the relationship school, and one person was bringing up how they were in their partner was works for a corporation, and she was on a work trip with two men where they have to spend a lot of time together for the weekend or whatever. And she was reporting just how the men started to objectify women in front of her and started to sort of do all this stuff. And the boyfriend was getting really upset about it as she was telling him, but she was not upset. And he was having a hard time understanding why she wasn't upset. And as we got into it, I was like, well, maybe you could get curious about her experience, because she's had to deal with this her whole life. And sometimes it's not safe to bring it up. And sometimes it's like, how many times a day would she actually have to fight for herself? So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about even the workplace environment that sort of, perpetuates this kind of stuff. And I've been, as a white privileged male here, I've been in these spaces and I've participated in that sort of nonsense in my earlier life. And it's really humbling, right? To get a woman's world and understand what a woman goes through. And in your book, you talk about just how many times you had to kind of develop a thicker skin just to be in the room, or just to hang in these intense conversations where men were putting you down, doubting your intelligence, doubting your capacity, doubting blah, blah, blah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So for your relationship school students who are having this frustration, I would say the question that they really should be asking is, would it be worth it for my girlfriend to say something? And maybe she's developed coping skills. So she doesn't let it get to her too much, but also that she understands this sort of this cost benefit analysis of when is it worth it to say something? Yeah. When is it worth it to say something? When is it worth it to remove yourself from the situation? When is it worth it to point out that something is wrong? And I remember actually when the Me Too Times Up movement came up, and I was having conversations with my husband and sort of in a co-ed group about what was going on with people getting fired for bad behavior. And we talked about things that were like lower level, offensive comments. And my husband and the other men in the group were like, oh my God, I can't believe people would say that to you. And the other women and I were like, are you kidding? That's like a Tuesday.
Whoa.
And like, we're not talking about anyone getting assaulted or anyone getting hurt or anyone's career being threatened. We're just talking about like minor, like what you might call like microaggressions, just like negative comments. And I remember like this sense of like the men in the group, and these are all like people who are married to each other, have spent a lot of time together. And the men in the group, this is at a dinner party, I'll never forget this. The men were like, I can't believe that people would say that to you. And all the women are like, are you kidding? Like, that's just sort of what we've had to learn to deal with. And and like have that mental calculation. Is it worth saying something? Is it worth getting up and leaving? Like, probably not. Like, and frankly, especially up until this whole Me Too Time's Up movement, if you could deal with it and not let it bother you, you might have been able to be more successful. If you let it get to you, you were in big trouble. But now I think the conversation is different. Okay. And there are things that that people used to say that, hey, I just don't think they say a lot of that stuff anymore. Or at least if they do, they understand that they shouldn't. I was talking to a journalist friend of mine, and we were joking about some of the comments that were made to us when we were on camera reporters, like right before going on air with male people, men who we were about to interview. And she said that she used to say people would make inappropriate comments about her or her body, like moments before being live on TV. And she would say, I don't think you're allowed to say that to me. Gee, I don't think you're allowed to say that anymore. And like would make like a kind of like have just like a line ready to go, be like, I don't think you're allowed to say that. And just like say it, like make it clear she didn't approve, and then just kind of move on. But I think that the reality is like, we all have to figure out how to cope with our day. And sometimes, and there are many situations where it's just not worth fighting every bit of it. I do actually think that some of the more subtle stuff that's biased, but it's not like that's directed at you. It's really, really valuable to identify if bias is the source of criticism or a comment, because then you could say, hey, and I talk about this in the book, this moment of being able to discern whether something is bias or actually valuable feedback, right? There's so much research showing that women are more likely to get criticized or get feedback from their bosses based on their style rather than on their substance. And when I saw that research, I was like, this is doubly unfair. Not only are you getting criticized in your style, which may be irrelevant to your actual performance, but you're also missing out on the really valuable stuff, which is the feedback in your performance, and men are getting that feedback. That's not fair. Yeah. So I think if you know what you're up against, then you're not going to take a biased comment as something that, might spark concerns that you did something wrong. You shouldn't spiral wondering what you messed up. And instead you could say, okay, of that comment, 50% of what he said was totally the result of his bias and his expectation that I'm supposed to be warm and nurturing because I'm a woman. And then actually, if you take that stuff and put it aside, there is actually valuable feedback in there. And I think having the wherewithal to be able to identify the difference between bias and stuff that's actually valuable enables you to actually be far more productive when encountering people who are fueled by bias or stereotypes. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of playing with nuance there that feels, like agile somehow versus reactive to like every little comment. Like you're like, well, hold on, let's tease this out a little bit. Well, you can also decide when you shouldn't take something personally. I mean, I think for me personally, it was so empowering to have all this data at my fingertips about what kinds of comments women are more likely to get or what types of double standards women are more likely to face. So if I got a comment that previously would have sent me spiraling and wondering what I'd done wrong and asking my colleagues if I had done something wrong, this time I could be like, oh, I know what that comment was about. It actually had nothing to do with me, and I'm not going to worry about it. And there's something about that that's so empowering and just such a relief, and it lets you go on with your day. Yeah. What's an example of a double standard that's kind of in this tech space that you well, so there's, by the way, these are double standards just in general. The stack of reports I had about all the ways women face double standards was overwhelming, but ultimately empowering. So one that I think is interesting is women are judged more harshly if they show humor in the workplace. They make jokes. Doesn't seem fair. Also kind of seems annoying. Like when she taught women to make jokes the same way as men do. Women are judged more harshly if they show any emotion, especially anger, which I guess is not surprising. For men, if they show anger, that heightens their sense of authority. Or like people are like, oh, he must be important. He's yelling and screaming. For women, they're judged more harshly. And women are judged more harshly if they give negative feedback to their employees. So I thought this was interesting because like if you're a boss, you're going to have to give negative feedback like a lot of the time. And I was talking about this with a woman, Kim Taylor is the CEO of a company called Cluster, which is a hiring platform for specifically mechanical and electrical engineers. So she's in a male-dominated field. Tech is already male-dominated, but she's dealing with the hiring of mostly male engineers if you look at who's applying for these jobs. Yeah. And so she constantly has to give negative feedback to her male employees. And she saw this study showing that women are judged more harshly for giving negative feedback. She's like, fine, I'm building a business. I hope this isn't always the case, but for now, I'm glad I have this information. I will delegate the negative feedback to one of my male employees to give to our staff. And she's like, this is not how I hope it all turns out, but now I can at least be more efficient with my time and not face horrible blowback for simply giving direct feedback. So for her, she was like, great, glad I know that now.
Yeah, so cool. You had some other interesting things. You said in relationship to standards, the conformity standard and the minimum standard. Will you talk about that?
So this all comes back to stereotypes, right? The stereotype is that men are good at business, men are going to be leaders, and women are less good at business and less likely to be leaders. Mm-hmm. So, and this is interesting in the context of if you think about who's like applying for jobs, like invited to apply for a job, and then who actually gets the job. Because women have the stereotype that like they might not be so smart, they might not be good at business, that it's easier for them to meet the minimum standard. So like a woman isn't, oh my God, you're not dumb. Like that's awesome. You're like not so dumb. So it's easier for women to meet the minimum standard, but it's harder for them and it's harder for them to meet the confirmatory standard, which is the higher standard that you need to get a top job. So for instance, like when you're having people apply for jobs, the people who are managing a process might invite women to apply, say like, this is great. We're going to have 50-50 male-female applicants. And they might be like, wow, it's so great. You're not a dummy. You're not terrible at business. So women should meet that minimum standard to get invited to apply. But to actually convince someone that you're totally in opposition to the stereotype that women are bad in business, you have to be so much better than the male counterpart who sort of more naturally is assumed to meet the stereotype. Mm-hmm. So you have to be better to defy the stereotype that women are bad at business. Yeah. And so that's the higher confirmatory standard. High. Yeah. And so like if the stereotype is leaders are men, for a woman to prove that she can be a leader, she has to be better than her male counterpart. I don't think that should be the case, but that is the way the brain tends to work in these situations. And that's what we have to try to change. Man. You also talked about male entrepreneurs are more likely to be asked in VC rounds how they will get new customers, and female entrepreneurs got asked how they will retain customers they already have. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because if you talk about sort of what happens when you get in the room and you're asking for money or you're asking for raise or this or that, so much of the responsibility and the pressure falls on the person who's pitching, right? You know, it's like, gotta be them. They must be doing something wrong. And the truth is that it's not just what the people who are pitching are doing, it's also the people who are on the other end of the equation and what they're doing. And it was really interesting to see this study that found that VCs, investors, both male and female, though they're predominantly male, ask different questions to the entrepreneurs. They're more likely to ask the men about the upside potential. Again, because of the stereotype, men are good at business. They ask the men about the upside potential. What's the best case scenario? How big is your business going to get? How big do you think your market could be? On the other hand of the equation, women don't fit the stereotype, that they don't look like what a stereotype of an entrepreneur looks like. So they're asked questions about like, what are you going to do if things go south? What do you do if the economy tanks? How are you going to retain customers if there's a new competitor? They're asked about the downside potential. But again, knowledge is power. Many of the women I interviewed, when I mentioned this study to them, said, yeah, once I saw that study, I changed my strategy. Uh-huh. And I would go, first of all, it's important for men to know this, so they don't ask these biased questions. You don't want men to be sort of underestimating the opportunity women could bring to the table. But for the women, they said, this is great. Now I know I'm going to go in. Lo and behold, they're going to ask me a question about the downside risk, but I'm prepared. I will answer that question efficiently, and then I will pivot and give you an answer about the upside potential. And I think knowledge is power. Making sure you understand the environment can be really helpful for women. But I also think men need to see that they don't want to overlook opportunities, just because that human instinct to be stuck on these stereotypes and archetypes about what men are and what women are. Yeah, completely. Another big one was the males overpromise and females more accurately assess themselves. And my wife and I had a kind of a laugh about this in terms of just her and I. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I got this. And it's kind of a version of overpromising, right? And she's way more calculated. Like, I don't know if I can pull this off, and it's so. Anyway, that was very poignant. And then when I think about, an Elon Musk who's constantly overpromising, it seems like it's not that big of a deal. But if Elon Musk was a woman, it would be like, I can't believe this terrible. He failed. We're not on Mars. He said we were going to be on Mars by now. By the way, in 2016, he told me we were going to be on Mars by 2020. What is it? It's 2023. Exactly. So he failed to live up to those promises. But you're right. That's sort of like under promising, over delivering instinct of women, I think in a lot of ways comes from the understanding that you will be judged more harshly.
Yeah.
And men, they're like, this is just what we do. We just overpromise, and people are gonna, praise us for that. But I think what's crazy is if you're in a male-dominated field and women don't know that that's what the men are doing, they put themselves at a major disadvantage. So I talk about the word, like I use the word bluster, like this idea that you're not lying, you're not intentionally misleading, you're just sort of blustering. You're kind of expanding your definition of what you think success might look like. You're just kind of, enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important to sort of acknowledge that it's not malicious. It's just things that are socialized.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
My cousin.
And by the way, I see with my kids, my son is like, I got this. And I was like, but do you really? Have you prepped? He's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, okay, well, we could do some more homework. So, it's like, I see these things like he's taught to act like he's got it under control, if maybe he needs to spend a little more time working.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it with raising two boys. I have a son, and it's intense in terms of how boys are conditioned and socialized to act more confident than they are, to know it all. And so this is like one of grown men's biggest triggers is feeling like they don't know or they're doing something wrong. It's so interesting to see that show up in marriages.
I also think it's really important to understand how kids need to be taught vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like if they are told it's okay to say you don't know what you're doing, it's okay to say you're scared, it's okay to say,
I don't know.
Like, I need help figuring this out, then they're never gonna, like, we don't tell little boys, like my 9-year-old, that it's okay to admit when has no idea what happened in class because he was out sick the prior 3 days. Like, he's never going to be able to feel comfortable expressing those feelings.
Exactly. Okay, a few more just observations from your book that women get more funding if they emphasize the social mission. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and so that falls into this idea of the stereotype of woman being more nurturing.
And more relational in a way. More like, we care about others.
Yeah. So that's the stereotype. Yep. So if the stereotype is men are bosses and agentic, top-down management, women are supposed to be warm and nurturing, that adding a social component to a pitch is found to sort of neutralize the bias against women. And it's because it helps women fulfill that stereotype that they're supposed to be warm and nurturing. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but that is something that has influenced women's ability to raise money. It shouldn't be the case. People should be investing in men and women equally, whether they have a social purpose or not. But it is interesting to see how that's impacted the approach of investors.
Hey there, every week I send out an email toward the end of the week giving you a tip or a pointer on personal growth, psychology, communication, and of course, relationships. If you want to receive that, go to relationshipschool.com/newsletter and make sure you're on my list so that I can send you these emails. I think they're awesome, high quality content coming your way. Talk about some of the benefits to women-led companies. I know obviously one of them is the focus on community, for example, or the sensitivity about the customer experience. Would you unpack these a little bit? Well,
first I'll just say statistically, companies with female leaders tend to outperform. Women are in the minority, but whether you're talking about public companies, female-led public companies, which tend to be more smaller, mid-cap, do tend to do better, even if it's just like over the past year, their decline, the stock is not down as much as the male-led companies. Whether startups led by women tend to go public or sell a year earlier on average, yielding returns to their investors a year earlier on average. And various studies have shown that they're more profitable. So even though they raise less money, the female founders of the startups are more profitable. Having more women on boards, having more women in the C-suite, it all yields better results. So I would say the overall takeaway is companies should be investing in more female leadership because they will do better. The men will do better if they have more women around them. Yeah. In terms of what the skill sets are that women tend to bring to the table, they tend to lead in a communal way, which means they're bringing in perspectives from across an organization rather than top-down leadership. They tend to use empathy in leadership, and I would make it very clear. I cannot tell you, Jayson, how many men on my book tour have said, like, empathy is just the same thing as kindness. It's the same thing as compassion. It is not. Empathy can lead to compassion, but empathy is all about the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand where they're coming from. Empathy can be so valuable and strategic when you're negotiating or you're trying to motivate your team or you're trying to figure out a problem. You need to be able to understand the other person's perspective. So women tend to demonstrate empathy. They're also more likely, back to your comment about vulnerability, more likely to show vulnerability in the workplace. And that vulnerability can be deployed to invite collaboration. And to show the people you're working with and you're partnering with that they're going to have agency and autonomy, which is obviously so important for people feeling like they can self-actualize if they can have that agency and autonomy. Great way to get people to want to work with you. Another one is that I think was really interesting and honestly probably the biggest surprise to me about all this research is women are more likely to show gratitude and practice gratitude in their work. Mm-hmm. And gratitude correlates with patience, which enables long-term planning and long-term thinking in the workforce. Mm-hmm. So I was really surprised by that. And also women are more likely to practice gratitude. A lot of research shows that women enjoy the feeling of gratitude more than men do. Men, if they feel really grateful, they may worry it means they owe someone something. And so have that feeling of like anxiety about it. But guess what, guys? Everyone should be thinking about things they're grateful for all the time because that will give you more patience and enable you to be a longer term planner and thinker. So those are just some of that. But I think all great skills. And I would say ultimately, these are all things that everyone should be thinking about right now. And I would say now more than ever, coming out of the pandemic really shed light on the importance of everybody deploying those skills, empathy, vulnerability, gratitude, communal leadership, no matter what gender they are. I really think it showed just how important those strategies are.
So with you on that. I just want it to be more relational and less, I guess, not relational. Just can
like hierarchical. Yeah,
hierarchical.
Yeah.
I noticed you didn't use the word, I don't think, patriarchy in the book or patriarchal. You didn't choose to use that much. Was that calculated?
I sometimes feel, and this is like me speaking as a journalist, that if words are used too much or used like broadly, they almost lose their meaning. Mm-hmm. So like the word authentic, like the leaders who are successful are leading because they are doing it in a way that's authentic to them and they're not trying to fit themselves into a box. Ultimately, I think men need to liberate themselves from the stereotypes also and lead in ways that are authentic to them. And many of those ways will be things I write about among these female leaders. But the word authentic is overused. We use it too much. I think it's like, it stopped really, we talk about authenticity on Instagram. Like, what are we really talking about here? Like, I feel like it's sort of lost its meaning. And the other term that I feel like has been overused is unconscious bias. Because it's just like, we talk about it all the time, but then if you talk about it too much, you sort of forget about what it really means, which is why I chose to use the term pattern matching to be more specific about what was going on there. And like patriarchy, like, I feel like it's like so broad, like what are we even talking about? Like this idea of a patriarchal system. I mean, I'm talking about how things are male dominated, but I don't know. I'm not advocating for a matriarchy. I don't want a matriarchy. I just want things to be balanced and for people to see the value that women bring to the table.
Yeah. I love that. Is it different at home? Like so many women, so with our work, there's obviously a lot of women are leading already in the relationship, like in a marriage. Men are, you could say, behind or a little slower on the uptake when it comes to empathy and like validating feelings and feeling feelings and being a little more emotionally literate and relationally literate as a stereotype, we could say that. And then women often get tired of doing the quote emotional labor for male partners in a heteronormative partnership. What are your thoughts on women leading at home and like feeling they're also leading at work and like, that's a lot. They're doing so much, I feel like. Well,
I think a lot about this book that my friend Eve Rotsky wrote called Fair Play. Do you know her book? Okay, so you got to have Eve on your program. So Fair Play is about dividing up the emotional, the invisible labor, including the emotional labor at home. And this idea that women take on so much invisible labor, like planning the birthday party, or emotional labor, and all of that just like ends up falling the women, whether it's planning the birthday party or packing the lunches or thinking about calling grandma or whatever that is, it falls on the woman. I actually think that my husband and I have benefited from the fact that I have a weird job. My job is as a TV reporter, and you're gonna think I'm going on a left turn here, but this does, I promise, tie back. I'm a TV reporter and I work East Coast hours in the West Coast. So I start my day reading emails by 4:45 at the latest. And I have a conference call every morning at 5:15. And I'm not around in the morning. Now with the pandemic, working from home, I did see my kids in the morning, but for the most part, I don't see my kids in the morning, but I'm around in the afternoon to pick them up for school. This has been the case since before we had kids. So from the moment I went back to work from maternity leave, my husband was in charge in the mornings.
Yeah.
I wasn't hovering over him. I wasn't telling him he was making the eggs wrong, which I'm sure he was. He gets, eggshells in the eggs. I wasn't telling him, that he couldn't forget the backpacks. And there were times that he left a backpack or a lunch at home and he had to turn around and come back and pick it up. Which, by the way, I would never have left a lunch or a backpack at home because I'm used to keeping all that stuff in my head. But I actually think that for us, the fact that he was fully responsible in the mornings enabled us to figure out how to divide stuff up. Mm-hmm. Some of the invisible labor. And I do handle birthday parties. I'm responsible for food. He deals with plenty of other stuff like the handyman. And so I think that we have been better than a lot of my other couples I know of really assigning responsibility because I literally was absent in the mornings. And then also the fact that if I had to travel for work, we would figure out the schedule and work it out. I think that's really helped us as a couple in terms of collaboration. Yeah. I am naturally far more emotive than he is, but I think that there's something about understanding how different we are and our different love, we have different love languages. We have different ways of communicating. I tend to talk at the top of my lungs and make everything I'm thinking very clear. And he's like, wait, I just need a second. But I think that there is something interesting about the way we benefited from that kind of clear division of labor in terms of family responsibilities. And if I was out of town and a kid was sick, he would stay home with them. And I think that really enabled us to understand the value of a real partnership in that. So
cool. Love it. Yep. Agreed. All right. A couple more questions and we'll let you go. This is kind of a question I think some women might ask. It's certainly a curiosity of mine. Since we're in this conversation of sort of female leadership, does a woman have to, if we talk about the president of the United States, does a woman have to, quote, become a man to win that seat?
Well, the same thing could be asked of, does a woman have to act like a man to be a CEO?
Yeah.
I don't know. In terms of the political question, I am not a political reporter. There's much about the political ecosystem that bewilders me. So I don't know. We've never had a female president. There have been female leaders in so many other countries. This question does remind me of the study that I cite in my book about female leaders of countries during the pandemic. And this revelation that countries led by women compared to very, very similar countries led by men, similar in terms of the demographics, the GDP, the size of the country, the location of the countries led by women had dramatically fewer deaths than their male counterparts. And this was dramatic. I include some of these numbers in my book. It was crazy how clear cut these differences are. And there were no exceptions. But these social scientists wanted to understand why that is. Were these women doing something really different, leading their companies, leading their countries in ways that were dramatically different than their male counterparts? To your question of being a female president or a male president. What the social scientists found is that it's not that the women were doing anything different. It's that the types of countries that elect women have different priorities. Yeah. The types of countries that elect women tend to value things like healthcare. They tend to place a higher value on education and social services. So basically, the countries that elected women had more of a safety net to support the healthcare system and to support their workers. And that's why those countries' outcomes were so dramatically different in terms of minimizing deaths. Yeah. So I would say the question is, what types of countries elect female leaders, not what type of female leader, or how does a woman need to act in order to be elected? Yeah. And based on that sort of premise, we could say that it might be hard to get elected in the United States. Well, it has been up to date. So we'll see. Voters, younger voters are different. We saw that in the most recent midterm. So who knows? Yeah. Julia, this is awesome. Thanks for writing this book. Where can people find out about the book and you and all that? The book is called When Women Lead. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Boorstin. On LinkedIn, I'm at Julia Boorstin. And on Instagram, I'm at Julia Boorstin. And I have a website. I forgot. It's juliaboorstin.com. You can find some articles and TV interviews and other things. I actually have a fun test on my website that your viewers might like. It's an empathy test. It tests how good you are at empathy. And let me tell you, I scored much higher than my husband. So I said, we got to work on this. I made him take it. You got to work on this. And it's basically whether or not you can guess what someone is feeling or thinking based on a black and white photograph just of their eyes. It's so interesting. So check it out. There's an empathy test on juliaboorstin.com. And I hope all your male listeners and viewers read my book, When Women Lead. I think they will find it surprising. Yeah, it's surprising and enlightening for me, absolutely. And as a business owner, it has me very motivated to, do this whole leadership thing differently. Thank you. Well, I'm so glad to hear it. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time and what you're up to. Thank you so much. Yo. As you know, I've dedicated my life to helping people with their relationships, right? I want to solve this problem so that all of you can work through your differences and have fulfilling, amazing, badass partnerships and relationships, family, coworkers, friends, whoever. And I have trained a ton of relationship coaches, almost 100 certified relationship coaches, to help you specifically work through your relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to a special deal we're offering to the podcast listener where you can get 50% off your first month of coaching with one of our amazing relationship coaches. Okay, if you're tired of therapy, it feels like that's going around in a circle, or you want to actually set goals and accomplish your relationship goals, hire a relationship coach. Okay, go to relationshipschool.com/get coaching now, and then use the coupon code FIRST50 to get the 50% deal off your first month of relationship coaching. Super psyched to have our amazing coaches serve you and help you get to the next level.